Hi everyone, welcome back to my channel, or if you're new here, welcome to my channel. Today I will be going over a pile of possibilities which I just picked up from the library today for the second quarter of the Historathon 2023 readathon, which covers the years 500 to 1500, so basically the entirety of the Middle Ages plus the very, very early Renaissance. I unfortunately kind of fell off the wagon a bit for the first quarter of the readathon because I had to switch my priorities to researching, writing, and editing my blog posts for blogging from A to Z April for two of my blogs. My themes this year were Persian names and Iranian/Persian history and culture, but thankfully now that obligation is finished, I can put my attentions back to reading. And so anyway, these were really interesting books. I was looking up on Amazon various medieval topics and just seeing if the library system had them. I was looking for some books about classical Japanese history as well, particularly Heian Japan, my favorite era of Japanese history, which is also the last era of classical Japanese history, but unfortunately they didn't have any. But perhaps in future, before this quarter of the readathon ends, I shall find some at the library. And so anyway, this one looked particularly interesting because it's about a woman, one of the most famous medieval women, or at least in medieval Europe, setting the world on fire. The Brief, Astonishing Life of St. Catherine of Siena by Shelley Emling. One of only two patron saints of Italy, the other being St. Francis of Assisi, St. Catherine was a political powerhouse in mid-14th century Europe, a time of war, social unrest, and one of the worst natural disasters of all time, the plague. She worked for peace between Christians while campaigning for a holy crusade against Muslims. Though illiterate, she grew into a great writer. Though frail, she often starved herself. She offered moral guidance and inspiration to kings, queens, and popes. It's easy to see why feminists have sought to claim her patronage. From her refusal to marry to her assertion that her physical appearance was of no importance, the famous saint is ripe for modern interpretation. How did this girl, the second youngest of 25 children of a middle-class dyer, grow to become one of the most beloved spiritual figures of all time? A theological giant to rank alongside the likes of Thomas Aquinas. Recalling her example, Pope Francis encouraged the young to learn from her how to live with the clear conscience of those who do not bend to human compromises. In setting the world on fire, Shelley Emling offers a fascinating portrait of this powerful, charismatic woman. And the next book I have also looked particularly interesting. I believe I have read at least one book prior by Thomas Cahill, Mysteries of the Middle Ages, The Rise of Feminism, Science, and Art from the Cults of Catholic Europe. And so hopefully this will be as good as his other historical nonfiction books I have already read. And I believe this is called a frontispiece. It looks particularly beautiful, and there's going to be some art, colored art throughout the book as well, including, like illuminated manuscript style. Like here's another example. I'm sorry if the angle is so bad. I don't really have much control over where and when I can film. I'm just looking through for some beautiful art. They have just really, like for example here, this would be the kind of thing you would, I'm sorry, the book is flopping all over the place in the margins of a medieval illuminated manuscript. Someday I really, really would love to own an illuminated manuscript of my own if I could ever afford one. Probably it would have to be a book of hours because from what I understand, those are like relatively inexpensive and easy to find. And so here's the synopsis. After the long period of cultural decline known as the Dark Ages, Europe experienced a rebirth of scholarship, art, literature, philosophy, and science, and began to develop a vision of Western society that remains at the heart of Western civilization today. By placing the image of the Virgin Mary at the center of their churches and their lives, medieval people exalted womanhood to a level unknown in any previous society. For the first time, men began to treat women with dignity, and women took up professions that had always been closed to them, although I'm not really entirely sure that's, accurate, because obviously, like, misogyny is one of the, besides antisemitism, one of the world's oldest hatred, and women didn't really have many rights to speak of at all throughout the Middle Ages, and obviously, historically, like, Jewish women had much more rights than their counterparts in a lot of other societies. So anyway, let's continue with the synopsis. The communion bread, believed to be the body of Jesus, encouraged the formulation of new questions in philosophy. Could reality be so fluid that one substance could be transformed into another? Could ordinary bread become a holy reality? Could mud become gold, as the alchemists believed? These new questions pushed the minds of medieval thinkers towards what would become modern science. Artists began to ask themselves similar questions. How can we depict human anatomy so that it looks real to the viewer? How can we depict motion in a composition that never moves? How can two dimensions appear to be three? Medieval artists, and writers too, invented the Western tradition of realism. On visits to the great cities of Europe, monumental Rome, the intellectually explosive Paris of Peter Abelard and Thomas Aquinas, the hotbed of scientific study that was Oxford, and the incomparable Florence of Dante and Giotto, Cahill brilliantly captures the spirit of experimentation, the colorful pageantry, and the passionate pursuit of knowledge that built the foundations for the modern world. Bursting with stunning four-color art, Mysteries of the Middle Ages is the ultimate Christmas gift book. And so I also, I'm getting ahead of myself. This is another religious book, like particularly interesting. I'm sorry, interesting is kind of a bland, nondescript word, but I have mentioned in many prior videos, I love studying world religions. I've been doing this all my life. It's a really, really long story, my personal religious background in my family history, but I haven't particularly read too many books about Christian history, although I have read many books about nuns. I absolutely love nuns. If you missed one of my previous videos, I kept mentioning the Ask Sister podcast from the blog and nunslife.org over and over again. I just absolutely love listening to the sisters, and so this would be a great way to learn more about Christianity, which isn't a religion I have particularly cited too much. I'm sorry if I already said that. My religion is Judaism, which is I am very, very strong and secure in, but the religions I feel closest to after my own are Hinduism, Buddhism, Taoism, and Jainism. Again, that's a really long story. Maybe someday in future I'll talk more about my religious journey, like maybe in an Ask Me Anything. And so this is basically just examining, obviously, the first 1,000 years of Christianity, how it manifested in different corners of the world. It doesn't just go in medieval Europe, it also goes in Africa, in Asia, just like folk customs and like different like theological practices and things like that, and just like cultural differences, and how I'll read you guys some of the things from the table of contents to give a little sample. This does look kind of like an academic book, but it doesn't look like so completely dense and impenetrable to be like a layperson couldn't read or enjoy it. So, a Christian emperor, Constantine, a Christian Jerusalem, Emperor Julian, the Jews and Christians, architecture and art, music and worship, the sick, the aged, and the poor, the birth of hospitals, Latin Christianity spreads north, Armenia and Georgia, two of my favorite countries, Arabic-speaking Christians, Christians under Islam, Egypt and North Africa, Christians under Islam, Spain, Egypt and the Copts, Nubia, Augustine of Hippo, the Bishop of Rome as Pope, Syriac-speaking Christians, the Church of the East, Central Asia, China, and India. So just really, really cool stuff like that. It's not just about religion, it's also about geography and history. So I'm looking forward to going through this book. And if I didn't already mention, this is a pile of possibilities. I don't necessarily have to read every single book in it. These are just like things I might look through. And I'm sorry if I'm speaking too fast. Yet again, I'm still not 100% comfortable on camera. And this is Justinian's Flea. I had to get this when I saw it, particularly because I love medical history and scientific history and medical curiosities and the macabre for many, many years. I loved watching untold stories of the ER. I believe it's still on television. I just haven't seen it in a very, very long time. It's just, I believe that's one of the many things. The first book which I ever read at the age of 3 was the adult uncensored version of Grimm's fairy tales that kind of set the stage for, I've always been drawn to the macabre and dark, depressing periods of history, dark recesses of the human soul, things like that. And so this is, many people believe the Justinian's plague at the very, very beginning of the Middle Ages was the first known major outbreak of the bubonic plague, which occurred many, many times throughout history. Contrary to what many people might assume, it wasn't just 1347 through 1351. It recurred many, many, many times throughout the ensuing centuries, and it also had occurrences like in the previous centuries, but obviously it didn't start becoming like a regular or nearly as, well, obviously it was deadly in Justinian's era, but it wasn't like exactly in the same deadly form, it just didn't come as often. I'm sorry if I'm rambling. This video is completely unscripted, and so I'm really, really looking forward to reading this book. I can't say enough about how much I love medical history, diseases, medical curiosities. Just I love watching programs like that since I was a little kid. I know maybe some people might think that makes me have a twisted mind, but we can't always help what we're interested in. And this is another one. Just look at that awesome cover illustration. I believe that might be an autopsy, Medieval Bodies, Life and Death in the Middle Ages by Jack Hartnell. Again, I cannot say enough about how much I absolutely love this topic. This should be a really fun read, or if I'm not reading it all the way through, at least, skim through and look at, and there's going to be illustrations too, and particularly with color that makes it even better. And of course, obviously, the Muslim world was big into, like medical advancements and scientific stuff throughout this era. Just like us, medieval men and women worried about growing old, got blisters and indigestion, fell in love, and had children, and yet their lives were full of miraculous and richly metaphorical experiences, radically different from our own, unfolding in a world where deadly wounds might be healed overnight by divine intervention, where the heart of a king, plucked from his corpse, could be held aloft as a powerful symbol of political rule. In this richly illustrated and unusual history, Jack Hartnell uncovers the fascinating ways in which people thought about, explored, and experienced their physical selves in the Middle Ages, from Constantinople to Cairo and Canterbury, unfolding like a medieval pageant and filled with saints, soldiers, caliphs, queens, monks, and monstrous beasts. This book throws light on the medieval body from head to toe, revealing the surprisingly sophisticated medical knowledge of the time, bringing together medicine, art, music, politics, philosophy, religion, and social history. Hartnell's work is an excellent guide to what life was really like for the men and women who lived and died in the Middle Ages, perfumed and decorated with gold, fetishized or tortured, powerful even beyond death. These medieval bodies are not passive and buried away. They can still teach us what it means to be human. This is the last one I found. I saw it when I was browsing the shelves in the biography section, and this is at the very, very tail end of the period for the Historathon, because it's, like the late 16th century. I'm not sorry, 15th century. Sometimes I get confused. This is about the mother of King Henry VII, who started the Tudor dynasty in England, uncrowned queen. The life of Margaret Beaufort, mother of the Tudors, by Nicola Tallis. In 1485, Henry VII became the first Tudor king of England. His ascension owed much to his mother, Lady Margaret Beaufort. Across years and countries, Margaret schemed to install her son on the throne, and, once he was in place, she orchestrated the union that would at last put an end to over 30 years of war, Henry's marriage to Elizabeth of York. Once Henry was crowned, Margaret's extraordinarily close relationship with her son, coupled with her active role in political and ceremonial affairs, ensured that she was treated and behaved as a queen in all but name. She is remembered as a severe and shrewd woman, even murderous for her alleged role in the disappearance of the princes in the Tower of London. But against a lavish backdrop of pageantry and passion, intrigue and war, Tallis dispels these myths, revealing a woman far more complicated and contradictory than our popular conception. Frequently stereotyped as overly pious and dour, the Margaret who emerges from uncrowned queen is also wildly extravagant and materialistic, funny, and indefatigable. She was iron-willed, but it was her charm that ultimately was her greatest weapon, essential in ingratiating herself to Richard III, even as she was planning to overthrow him, and in courting the Yorks to offer their child as her daughter-in-law. Drawing on fresh readings of primary sources, Tallis rehabilitates Margaret as a dynamic political operator and devoted mother, asking what it means for women to hold power and how they wield it. And this is also, I picked up recently, the last time I was at the library a few days ago. Obviously, it's not historical non-fiction. In the time period, they have a display on Arab American writers and Muslim writers. This obviously isn't an Arab writer. This is a Turkish writer. It was originally written in Turkish, last train to Istanbul by Ayşe Kulin. Hopefully I pronounced that correctly. Born into privilege to one of the last Ottoman pashas, beautiful, spirited Selva is the brightest jewel in her father's household, until she falls in love with Raphael Alfandari. Though Turkey has long been a safe haven for Jews, marriage between a high-ranking Muslim girl and a Jewish boy is strictly forbidden. Yet young love will not be denied, and Selva and Raphael defy their parents and marry, fleeing to Paris in hopes of a better life, only to find themselves trapped in the path of the invading Nazis. But in the midst of darkness shines a beacon of hope. A handful of courageous Turkish diplomats, protected only by the tenuous neutrality of their homeland, hatch a daring plot to spirit the exiled lovers and hundreds of innocent Jews to safety. Together, they will traverse a war-torn continent, crossing enemy lines and risking everything in one last, desperate bid for freedom. And hopefully this video wasn't too rambling and all over the place. I will leave a link down below in the description box to all of the co-hosts of the Historathon Readathon. If you enjoy content like this, please consider subscribing if you haven't already, and hit the notification bell so you can know when I upload new content. And I really, really do appreciate seeing comments from you guys. A comment means so much more to me than a like, because I just, want to have conversations and make more friends across booktube and authortube. And thank you very much for watching all the way to the end, and I will see you guys again very soon. Thanks for watching. Bye.